Everyone is only Oded and me today.
Yes, yes, yes. And we have a guest. We have David from straight from Israel. Wake up
No.
very early
Hey,
to join us
so you're
today.
good, Oded?
Yes, we good. It's winter break. Lots of people in and on vacations. Over here in WA, it's pretty cold. My parents are coming on Friday morning, so they succeeded to find a flight after their flight was canceled because of the Israel-Iran thing that we have a few weeks ago. So
Mm.
we are very happy. So yeah,
How
keep
are they flying now out of Israel to Australia? Through Thailand?
through no no through Dubai.
Oh,
Through
it's open now.
Yeah, it's the
All
easiest.
right,
They
good
found
to
like
know.
a decent flight. So they're not gonna be here for 4 weeks as planned. They're gonna be here for 2 weeks, for good and bad. But yeah, we all are very excited. And what's up with you? With you had a rough week in Melbourne.
Very rough weekend. Yes, it seems like it's getting worse and worse here, and it seems like no one is doing anything about it. But I'm just a guest in this country, so I'm not going to comment on that anymore.
Right.
But it seems like it's getting worse and worse. Yeah, and we are feeling it, and we're breathing a bit more heavily every time it happens, and it's one of those days when or weekends when people from Israel who were bombarded only 2 weeks ago from Iran are calling me
Right.
to
Right.
ask if I'm okay and what heck is happening in Melbourne. And this time it was actually reported widely in Israel. Even the Prime Minister Netanyahu commented on this. It was all over the news. Yeah, unfortunately, Melbourne is making the headlines for all the wrong reasons in the world.
Right.
Hopefully, somehow that
But
changes soon
David,
because
do you know what happened? Like you've heard about it? Like, everything that happened over here in Melbourne the past few days?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. It's been over the news here in Israel. We're following, and we're honestly confused. I didn't realize it was such a bad situation right now in Australia with regards to anti-Semitism. So it's very concerning.
Crazy.
certainly is. We're going to come back to David in a second, but maybe we should start because he has a lot to say. He's a very interesting guest, and I want to thank him again for joining us. But I want to. We need to start, unfortunately, again with very, 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 very bad news from Israel. We just learned there was a major incident overnight in Gaza. Unfortunately, five of our boys, five of our soldiers were killed. An additional, some are saying 12, some are saying 14. Please forgive me. I still don't have the right number. Additional 12 or 14 were injured. What all of our boys are, of course, dear to us, and we are uh, so sad about these news. But what's please don't get me wrong, interesting this time. All the unit that was attacked, that was a part of this battle, was Netzach Yehuda unit, which is the Haredi unit. It used to be known as the Haredi part of the Nachal brigade, and now it's in a different brigade. But it's the religious boys who were in the news for different reasons lately, and are still are about them actually joining the IDF and serving. And here we have so sadly, five of them falling, 14, 12 or 14 injured. Just in the last month, by the way, when we were still fighting, but not fighting, sitting on the fence, whatever you want to call it, in Gaza, about 30 of our soldiers fell only in the last month in Gaza. So it's absolutely terrible. And all of us here, on behalf of UAA and the whole community, send our condolences to the families and to all the people in Israel. So after finishing with this sad news, we wanted to give a small update, Oded and I together, about what's happening more largely, kind of zooming out of Gaza and understanding where we stand right now. As we're speaking, or maybe only a few hours ago, there was a major meeting happening in Washington, D.C. at the White House between Bibi and Trump. The last time that meeting was held, I don't know if you remember, Trump was, to Bibi's surprise, telling the whole world he's talking to Iran and he's engaged in talks to them. And then we know what happened only a few weeks after that. So whatever they're talking about in those rooms and whatever they're telling us that they're talking about after the meeting might be two different things. But we know what's on the agenda, more or less. The first and the most important thing is the hostage deal. It seems like it will be happening maybe in the next week, as Trump is saying.
From what I saw, it's they're talking about Saturday. Hopefully, if it will,
Yeah, I was just going to say, within a week, it's supposed to start. The deal is, this was reported, it's a 60-day ceasefire. On the first day, Saturday, hopefully, Oded, as you say, 8 of our live hostages are to be released. On the 7th day, 5 bodies, 5 deceased hostages are to be released. On the 10th day, we are supposed to get information about all the hostages, clear information, what's the situation is with them, if they're alive or dead. On the 30th day, 30, 5 bodies were to be returned to Israel. On the 50th day, we're supposed to get 2 live hostages back. And on the 60th day, 60, we're supposed to get 8 additional bodies left into Israel. Oded, you want to say something, or should I continue?
No, I think it's something that we are all, waiting for. I think it will be a very, very, from one hand, we are very happy that it's going to happen, and we really hope it's going to happen. I'm sure the pictures that we're going to see are going to be very, very challenging for all of us. But it's kind of about like what, after 630 days, right? Something like that. It's about time for that, to find a solution for it. We're all tired. We all want to move on. And I think like the Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump meeting, we're gonna hear some good news also about Hamas and the hostages, but with everything that's going on up north in Syria and in Lebanon. So hopefully after this next few days, hopefully next Israel update next week, we'll be able to bring some more positive news into the table.
Amen, amen, amen. By the way, all of these return of the hostages, live or dead, are supposed to be without the big, disgusting ceremonies they held in Gaza last time they were letting people go, which is part of the deal.
Yeah, this is what we all aim for. And I think, if we're talking about the topic of today, Daniel, Gili, and I, and Yair, we had this conversation last week that, we want to bring something a little different to the table. So we said, like, why not talking about Israel, Israel high tech, something that Israel really well known for many, many years, all the startup nation and so on. And I was very happy to have also the opportunity to meet David last week, and I pulled him into the table and tell him, David, you must join us to give us your thoughts. And I think like from that perspective, since October 7, the Israeli high tech went through really, really tremendous challenges that David's going to talk about, from employees that needed to go to reserve and how it impacted the companies, etc. But I just saw a few numbers, and David, I hope I'm not going to take you the numbers from what you're going to talk, but it's crazy. It's like over 50% of Israel GDP comes from high tech, which is spectacular. And this is from 2023 to 2024, especially in this time. So we're honored to have you here, David. If I'm saying things not correctly, correct me. David is an entrepreneur, venture capitalist, or whatever you call it in the right terms. IDF reservist, which have a crazy story how your professional life and your time in the reserve, more than 200 days, right, in the past 2 years, got into one. So we'll hear from you very soon. David is the co-founder of TBD Venture Capital. That is, since you guys launched it, you kind of invested between 35 to $40 million in US dollars in groundbreaking Israeli startup in cybersecurity, AI, and infrastructure software. About the Israeli high tech, in light of those challenges, and there's a lot of challenges to the Israeli high tech in the past 2 years, but also David will share with us his personal story, which is really incredible. David, the stage is yours. I highly recommend of you all that here today to ask questions. David is waiting for it. So there you go, David.
Thank you, Oded, and thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to meet you all. calling in from Ra'anana in Israel. It's 6:41 a.m. My name is David, or David. I'm Israeli born and raised. Grew up here my entire life. Started in the military, as most Israelis do, as a combat medic in infantry brigade. This was between 2009 2012. Discharged in 2012 and started a career in venture capital. And for the past 13 years, I've been investing in Israeli companies, basically in Israel, but all around the world. Israelis tend to find themselves in very interesting places, but particularly the U.S., New York, San Francisco has been the other areas of focus. As Oded mentioned, focus mostly on cybersecurity, software companies, technology companies, and that's what I've been doing over the majority of my career. I think the interesting part of my story starts right around October 7th. This was me coming back from a business trip on October 6th from the Emirates, landing Friday morning, back from a business trip, going to family members for the weekend with my family, my wife and two kids. My wife was 5 months pregnant at the time. And then 24 hours later, all hell broke loose. I was drafted on October 7th at 7:45 a.m. And was down south at 11 o'clock. I was in the Netiv HaSara area, which is closer to the northern part of the envelope, with my reserve unit, which is basically a forward deployed medical squad. So it's a bunch of combat vets that have some sort of medical training. I'm a medic, but we were a group of surgeons and paramedics and anyone who has some sort of medical training, maneuvering with the frontline forces. So on the day of the attack, thankfully, we had the opportunity of providing urgent medical care to wounded soldiers and to civilians that were affected from the savage attack. And then since then, as Oded mentioned, 200 days and counting. 200 days sounds a lot, but friends of mine have completed close to 400, some even more than that. So I think I'm still, somewhere in the middle of the table when it comes to completed days. But 200 days in Gaza in 4 rounds, which on the one hand incredibly intense, and on the other hand, something that is, I would say probably one of the most meaningful things I've been able to do in my adult life. I think on the day of October 7th, pandemonium was sort of like the way to describe what was going on in Israel. The Israeli economy is an interesting economy. It's kind of split into 2 parallel universes. One is the traditional industry, which still somewhat lagging behind and mostly self-sufficient at best. And then there's the high-tech ecosystem, which I've been fortunate enough to build my career in that industry. And at the time of the attack, it was still firing on all cylinders. But this was pre-attack. This was like the judicial reform period where things were also very choppy and very unstable when it comes to where things are going. But despite that, the tech ecosystem was still booming. And then when the attack happened, you saw the enlistment, not just of reservists, going down south to fight and going up north to man the borders, but also the tech ecosystem that sort of shifted its prowess when it comes to operational excellency and just execution to some sort of logistical mega center to help with displaced families, with soldiers who were in dire need of equipment. I myself was one of those soldiers. I found myself with the bare minimum of equipment that wasn't sufficient. So being able to kind of leverage the tech brain, but also the ability to maneuver on a logistical perspective was incredible. So it was really amazing to see how not just soldiers but the entire country sort of enlisted itself to the efforts. Which it wasn't just the high tech industry; it was the ultra orthodox community as well. We received more food that we could probably even comprehend from the beginning of the war until this day. So again, it's something that embodies Israel in the most incredible way. Is this unity. It's just a shame that we need the times of crisis to kind of kick that into 5th gear. The amazing thing about the tech ecosystem is that it went through that resilience period. I think for the first 3 months of everyone sort of involved, engaged, and helping, and then I think there was an expectation maybe, it falling off a cliff. I think there was a big group of, or a big portion of human capital that was unavailable, whether on reserves, which I'll touch on that in a moment because there's some nuances there, whether they were on reserves or whether they were just, preoccupied for a variety of justified reasons. But what happened was exactly the opposite, which is incredible, but also kind of not surprising. I think a lot of foreign investors and colleagues from the U.S. always ask, like, what's the Israeli superpower? I said it's the ability to normalize the not normal, and kind of function as if everything's normal when the house is on fire. Which when the house eventually isn't on fire, it makes everything dramatically easier. So the ecosystem started booming. You would see very famous international investors actually set up physical offices in Tel Aviv, which is unheard of and never happened before. So VCs like Sequoia, which is one of the most famous venture capital investors in the world, hired a local partner, opened an office. That's just one example of many, many investors who became more and more active in Israel. It's incredible to see that translated not just to PRs and fluff, but actual results in the field. So if you look at the numbers of capital raised in 2024, about $12 billion have been raised by Israeli startups in 2024, which is up 30% from 2023. And out of those $12 billion, $4 billion were for the cybersecurity segment alone. So these are huge amounts of money that are being raised for Israeli tech companies. And if you look at even just 2025, in the first half of 2025, $4.7 billion have been raised. And this is up 5% from 2024. So we're still seeing an increase. And mind you, the context on a global perspective is important to understand, because since 2022, 2023, the global tech ecosystem has been at a little bit of a decline. And capital raised by most ecosystems has actually gone down, not up. So if you consider the variables on a macro level, but also on a micro level, the Israeli story is even more impressive. Now, looking at the ecosystem through pink lens and seeing how everything is rosy is great, but there are a lot of complexities. Primarily, looking at the prolonged war, which it's amazing that we're coming up on almost 2 years, and I think no one in their wildest dream thought it would take this long. I actually remember the first phone call I had with my wife was 30 days after October 7th. And she asked me how long this is going to take. And I said to her, they're saying 6 months, but that sounds too much. It doesn't sound realistic. So, lo and behold, 2 years in. And if you look at the vast majority of the reservists that are participating in the ongoing war effort, they're all combat vets or, come from sort of combat orientation. And then if you look at the tech ecosystem, the vast majority of the participants aren't necessarily from a combat background. This typically it results from some sort of lag between a 8200 alumni and a Golani alumni when they're discharged. An 8200 alumni has training in software and is able to get a job quite easily. Golani soldier wants to go take a 6 month trip around the world, sometimes to Australia and New Zealand, and there's some sort of delay. So if you look at the ecosystem, there's a big gap between the ex-combat vets and their penetration within the ecosystem. So that's something that's going to be a big challenge eventually when the war ends. A lot of people are going to, find themselves looking for a job. They've unfortunately lost their jobs throughout the war, being dedicated to reserve duty, and their employers just could not keep up with the pace, unfortunately, and sometimes in very unpleasant ways. So I think one of the main challenges and one of the main goals for the tech ecosystem in general is finding more ways to include these reservists as they become discharged from the war, when the war, please God, ends, and with our hostages home and the security threat neutralized. But the reason I mention this is it sort of kind of connects to my personal story, beginning on October 7th and where I am today. So, sort of rewind to October 7th, down south in Gaza, in and out of Gaza for 2 months. And then in December, I actually came out of Gaza to escort a unit back into the Strip. And I was waiting at Zikim, which is one of the crossings in the northern part of the Strip, kind of waiting in a Hummer. And because I speak English like an American, I was designated as the official fundraiser for the unit. So I was waiting in my Hummer, and then one of my unit buddies walked up to me and said, "There's this American dude. He's giving out free food and equipment. Go talk to him. Maybe you can get a donation for the unit." So duty calls. Walked over. Turns out it's a longtime friend of 10 years that is actually based in New York, who decided to not just sit in his apartment on October 7th and got on a plane a couple weeks after the attack, and then started running around Israel, particularly around military bases, fundraising and donating equipment and just handing out food, which was a pretty remarkable way to kind of reconnect with a longtime friend, which set us down a path of eventually raising a VC fund together. My partner is Brazilian, born and raised, lives in New York, former race car driver, never had any affinity to Israel, but October 7th rekindled his passion to Israel and wanted to combine his professional career with his more personal mission. So we decided to join forces. And after a very long, grueling 2024 of me going in and out of Gaza, eventually being discharged at the end of 2024, we started raising a fund together. We are focused more on early stage investing in Israeli companies, as Oded mentioned, mostly technology companies, enterprise software, cybersecurity, infrastructure. And one of the things that we really, put a sort of, more personal focus on is, kind of connects to the combat veteran situation, is we really try to, invest in combat vets, but also, help them get integrated and get, placed into companies, and even more so donate a part of our, economic benefits in our fund to a nonprofit that works with combat vets to help them, kind of assimilate into the ecosystem. So we're very passionate about that problem, because we also believe that the folks that have been running on pure adrenaline for the past 2 years will have a lot of really good ideas, and will have a lot of good energy to kind of execute on those ideas. So we believe it's incredible talent. But all in all, I think if you look at the ecosystem in general, and what it's been able to achieve, and not just endure, the future is incredibly bright. And obviously, based in Israel, I'm biased inherently. But if you look at it in comparison to other ecosystems in the world, and even in the US, Israel is still second to none. So that's in general, I would say, my perspective on the Israeli ecosystem. I think it's incredibly positive, but it's got its challenges. Obviously, waking up every morning or not every morning, in mornings with really sad news, as Daniel mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, is terrible for everyone, but especially someone who's been in those situations and has actually experienced those types of encounters where you experience casualties and severely wounded soldiers. It hits hard, and I think it just pushes us even further to focus on not just sustaining, but building a country for the citizens when this war will end, because it will end, and it will end for the better. We'll end with a positive outcome because we don't have a choice. And being able to kind of make ready some sort of better environment for combat vets and for the citizens in general is, I think, a really important personal mission. So that's my story. That's my perspective. I'm happy to answer any questions, any areas that you guys are interested in. Please feel free to ask any questions.
David, toda rabba. Thank you very much. That was great. Where's your English from? That's not from
my mom is from Detroit, and my dad is from London. I got the wrong accent, unfortunately, but
right. It sounds good though. Very, very nice. Thank you very much for this. Very, very interesting. But we're not letting you go. We have a lot of questions.
Not going
anywhere. Okay. Yeah. Have your morning coffee with us, right?
Yes.
I want to ask you a deeper question. Like everything is. There's another side to everything we do in Israel, and so is to what you're doing. And you're going around the world, and you're talking to people and meeting people who maybe never met an Israeli before, or never worked with an Israeli, or have a conception about Israel. And I wanted to ask you, how can the tech, who is so much towards outside of Israel, is looking outside and is meeting with all these people, how can we use not to only grow the economy and the crazy numbers that Oded said before, how much it's working with the Israeli economy, but also to, I don't know, to reshape the perceptions of Israel, but to maybe change some minds out there. And do you have any examples of, if I'm right, did this happen before? Were you able to somehow change someone's opinion? And also, a question is, are people who are working in this field, are they aware that there is an added value to them working outside of Israel, that they're representing the country and often, on the first line of hard questions and I asked you a lot of questions. Try to answer, David, if you understood what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say.
it's interesting because I remember as a kid and going on field trips, the principal would always say, like, when you're on a field trip, you're not just representing yourself, you're representing the school. So I think that applies to every Israeli traveling abroad, and especially working in the tech ecosystem. You're not just representing yourself and you're representing your business, but you're representing a very, very significant I would say ethnic group or tribe, and the vast majority of folks that interact with the tech ecosystem are by design pro-Israel or pro-business. When they see Israel as a significant business opportunity. I will say that the outpour of support from the beginning of the war, from the general tech ecosystem, was incredible. Having said that, you would see people that would kind of become silent, and in the past were a lot more friendly and chatty. So it kind of makes you sort of understand who your friends are and who your not so friends are. But I also will say that because the tech ecosystem is so incredible and because it's so resilient, most investors understand that it's kind of through hell or high water kind of situation with Israel. So you're either in it in the good times and the bad times, or you won't be in it at all, because Israelis have a tendency of being a little bit vindictive when it comes to to being wrong. So these investors know that. I will say that more particularly on like the Hasbara side of things and just like being a representation of Israel, it's super important. And I found myself many times talking about things that I think a lot of non-Israelis don't particularly understand. So there are a lot of nonprofits that not just try to bridge the gap between ex-combat vets and the tech ecosystem, but the Arab population in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox population in Israel, and trying to create a lot more inclusion. And they don't know. So the ability to speak to that intelligently is important. I don't think most investors are versed enough in the data, but they should be, because every time you're interacting with a person that is not Israeli and has no affinity to Israel, it's an opportunity to create another ally. And where I'm seeing it mostly now is surprisingly in Saudi. I've spoken to many Saudi investors over the past year, and I think they're not going to join the Zoom with an Israeli flag and say Am Yisrael Chai, but their whole perspective is the Saudi strategy is there's a very young population. They're trying to get off oil. They're trying to think about how they can not just sustain themselves but thrive in the future, similar to what we're doing on a daily basis. And they understand that it's more beneficial for them to kind of interact with Israel versus to shun them. And the way to do that is obviously, just by investing through proxies, which they've been doing for many, many years, but also trying to understand what else can be done. So when you're able to speak intelligently about what's happening here, that isn't sort of discriminatory or prejudicial against certain groups, but rather the contrary, the ability to communicate that is important. So that's, I would say, where I've experienced that so far. I will say that in the beginning of the war, I did experience some not so pleasant interactions, fundraising, particularly in Italy, which was really surprising, where the narrative was, we're not going to invest in Israel until the war is over, until the oppression ends, or I think was the word that they used. But that was very rare. I think for the most part, it was very supportive.
That's interesting. I've just, you talked about like Saudi Arabia and the relationship with everything that's going on. I would like you to elaborate on it, because we don't hear more, we don't hear too much about, the business side of, the Abraham Accords, especially after the October 7, right? I mean, it's relatively quiet.
Yeah.
So you touched it a little bit. Can you give us a little bit of your opinion and from your experience about what's going on underneath the table in the business world, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and so on, and maybe like a little interesting or funny story that you experienced?
Right. So as far as business considered, so at least with the Emirates, it's been going on pretty well, even before the war. I think it's actually heightened itself since October 7th. I think they understand that it's not just a business. I think Middle Eastern culture is very warm and very personal. And I think as you bond with people, it sort of you get entangled. So a lot of colleagues from the UAE after October 7th, were showing a lot of support. The amount of messages I got from folks that I really just met 2 days ago, coming back from Abu Dhabi, was very surprising. So I think from the UAE, it's firing on all cylinders. They're investing in a lot of funds. They're investing in a lot of tech companies, and they're looking for more and more opportunities in Israel, particularly around cybersecurity and defense. The entire world is looking at the defense sector as something that they have to invest in. Even Europe, it's been historically, at least in the recent history, a lot more pacifist than not. And I think from a Saudi perspective, it's still ways away. I think they're at least for the next 5 years, it's going to be mostly done through proxies. And I use proxies in a positive way, not in the way that we're used to hearing, with the Iranian proxies. I think it's going to be done by investing in funds, by investing in U.S. funds that are more active in Israel. I would say so my sort of online persona is more of like a joker. Like I post a lot of jokes on social media just to kind of lighten the mood, especially in the VC industry that is very full of itself. And I've garnered like a pretty interesting following based on that type of narrative that I've been pushing for the past couple of years. And the most interesting inbound connection that I've gotten through that effort was actually a big investor from Saudi Arabia who reached out and said, I've always been interested in Israel, but you're funny, so let's have a chat. So, being able to kind of bridge gaps between, the Jewish humor plus the Israeli tech was something that was, a unique sort of occurrence. But again, I think everyone's kind of popping the champagne bottles and thinking that we're going to be kumbaya with Saudi. I think it's a long process, and they tell us, and that's the message I'm hearing from them as well. I think it's years and years and years of viewing Israel as like a bad actor in the neighborhood. You can't just like flip a light switch and change that overnight. But I think as they start seeing the economic value and the sort of the royal family in Saudi begins to like push it, sort of top down, I think it'll continue to progress and at an exponential rate, not linearly.
I'm a bit more optimistic than you, David. I think things are moving so fast right now in the region, and things that are happening in weeks are things that didn't happen in decades before. And I think sooner rather than later we will see much more closer connections between Israel and its neighbors. I think Saudi Arabia, with all its money, of course, we're not going to have investors from Syria and Lebanon into Israel, but where money talks with for the sake of a conversation, did you think 5 years ago we were going to sit here and talk about you having investors from Abu Dhabi and Dubai flying back and forth and investing money into Israel directly? By the way, you would call me a lunatic, right? So
no way. Yeah. 5 years ago, if you would have described this Zoom in the context of this Zoom, I would say no. This is not happening. This will never happen. So yeah, absolutely not.
Last time I flew through Dubai, the person sitting next to me was the wife of the chief rabbi of Dubai. So that's
interesting. Growing up, always thinking about Saudi Arabia and Emirates, and I wear a kippah, so the thought of walking around Abu Dhabi or Dubai with a kippah on my head was ludicrous. Like it's a really good way to get yourself killed. So like being able to do that now is absolutely incredible. So yeah, I would say if you look at it in a zoom out perspective, we are progressing at an exponential rate. But if you can maybe zoom in, maybe it's slower than we would like it to be.
Right. No, okay, good. I'm going to go back to the basics. A very basic question, and that's what makes Israel actually such a strong place for innovation, especially in tech, maybe. And how are we able to do this? And how do you explain that to yourself, to us, and then to the investors out? What's so special about us? So I'm not fishing for confidence. Be realistic.
No,
we're all friends on this call.
It really is an incredible phenomenon. I don't really know what the sort of how to deconstruct it into a math problem, because the reality is that so many countries have visited Israel trying to replicate the ecosystem in their own location. The Emirates is a perfect example. The cross collaboration between the Emirates and Israel is particularly because they're trying to sort of copy paste the ecosystem to to their region, so they can cultivate an ecosystem like that. I think obviously, and most of the folks probably on this call have heard this before. The military is a massive contributor to the sort of innovative mindset that you have in Israel. Even if you look at it from a sort of from a conceptual perspective, the military is a problem solver, right? We're facing problems on a daily basis, and these are life and death problems, and we need to find solutions. So the way where you take 18, 19-year-old kids and shape their minds to solve problems no matter what, because the stakes are so high, it creates this persona of an entrepreneur, this persona of a business person or a problem solver that is second to none, because the stakes are indescribable to other ecosystems. Whereas if you look at the States, it's either tech companies or the universities that are creating brilliant minds. But I like to say, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and I don't know. Mike Tyson said that, not me, but I like to quote him. But Israelis have a tendency of getting punched in the face quite often, so they know what happens when things get a little bit sort of off the sort of the general route. I think if you look at it on a more technical perspective, the military, or at least in the Israeli military, has become very technological over the years. It's not just from a sheer maneuvering forces perspective, which is also highly more technical than it was when I was an 18-year-old in my mandatory service. But I think if you look at like systems and cyber and just big infrastructure systems in general, it's all technology oriented and it's all frontier. The Israeli mind that is entrusted with military excellence is second to none. At the end of the day, Jews are smart. It's just a fact. So being able to kind of translate that to technology is incredible. So it creates a really, really strong foundation that is a consistent stream, right? If it was just like sort of flash in the pan, that's something else. So because every year you have a new cohort of really, really smart kids that are becoming the next generals in Israel and building the next life-saving products, they eventually leave. And when they leave the military, or at least the vast majority of them leave the military, they have this void. It's sort of like addicting to solve problems, especially really tough problems at scale. So looking at the Israeli economy, and we touched on this in the beginning of the session, the economy is split into two. There's the general economy, which is not great, and we have local industry, but there's not a lot of ability to scale. And then you have the tech ecosystem, which is endless and unlimited. And then on the flip side, if you look at building wealth in Israel, it's not like you can go work in New York and build a really nice career as an investment banker and make a lot of money and have 3 homes and 17 cars. In Israel, you're typically very limited on your career path. So if you want to build a lot of wealth, the tech ecosystem is there. So if you combine the technical prowess that is deeply rooted into very, very young adult generation, plus the ability, the sort of desire to solve problems that doesn't go away because it's part of your personality, and then you couple that with wanting to actually be successful from a business perspective, which I think is deeply rooted in most of us, that creates the perfect storm. I will say also that if you look at different types of personas, especially combat vets, their tenacity is second to none. I mean, meeting entrepreneurs that who've been in combat and they've survived pretty intense ordeals. If you ask them well, how are you going to meet your quarterly targets for sales? I'm like, listen, once you get a few RPGs shot at you and you're able to live to tell the tale, everything else seems a lot easier. So I think, again, that context sounds absurd, but it sort of wraps the entire Israeli population to a certain extent. So all that together really creates something that is very unique and thankfully defensible. It's unreplicable. I don't think any other country in the world can replicate what we have here, for good and for bad. It is a double-edged sword because everyone would be really happy if all our neighbors were friendly and we didn't have to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on security. But on the flip side, there is a positive element there that pushes the country forward.
Right. David, we're talking in the past 20, 30 minutes in general about the high-tech industry, also about your story. But can you give us one or two of the most interesting company startups that you are investing today and why you decided to invest in them? Don't say names. I know maybe it's not maybe you can't share names and all that stuff, but like interesting technologies and why?
That's a really challenging one. I mean, there are so many. It's hard to sort of circle out one without getting too technical. You know, that's the problem as a venture capitalist. You know, I can be super passionate about a cybersecurity company. You can ask my wife. I'll talk to her about companies all the time, and she'll just look at me like, I don't know what you want from me. This is way above my pay grade. So yeah. So I mean, I had the fortune of investing in a really great company actually during the war. You know, it's not so much the idea that gets me excited, which is a great idea. It saves a lot of money for a lot of companies on backing up data, which doesn't seem incredibly interesting or sexy at all. But what's interesting there is that the founding team behind the business already sold the business for $250 million in 2019. And what we're seeing now in Israel, which is truly remarkable, is sort of like a next level of the ecosystem. Whereas from early 2000s till a couple of years ago, if you would see a 300, 400, $500 million exit, that would be incredible. Everyone would be celebrating in the streets. When Waze was acquired for $1 billion, everyone thought it was monumental. But now what we're seeing companies like Wiz getting acquired for 32 billion. Right. So we're seeing the opportunity to build massive businesses that are huge contributors to the Israeli economy. So if I look at that company, the company is called Eon, where very fitting for the potential of what they're building. Eons and Eons. The ability to create another multi-billion-dollar outcome that is a net contributor to the economy. That's what gets me excited. I think if you're looking at more of like a something that gets me interested in the nitty-gritty details. So this is a little bit of an outlier. So I invested in a company that actually is taking on the cosmetic surgery industry, which is a massive industry and surprisingly also recession-proof. We invested actually when it was before the war, when it was the global economy was still a little bit challenging. And when we first heard the pitch, it was like, oh well, cosmetic surgery is very vain, it's very problematic. Turns out it's not. The vast majority of cosmetic surgery is more corrective surgery after disasters versus people just wanting to have a prettier nose or calf implants. So what they're basically doing is they're using AI technology to help visualize how people look post surgery, and this is for patients who are able to kind of see how they would look once the work is done. But then on the flip side, from a business perspective, most cosmetic surgeons, and I hope there are no cosmetic surgeons listening on this call, so I hope I won't offend anyone, are not the best sort of digital marketers or like digital business owners. They're not fully focused on customer acquisition or nurturing the leads and showing them like how to push them through a funnel. So they basically create this holistic platform that connects the patients on the one hand and help them visualize and sort of streamline the process, and the surgeons who are like the actual service providers, if you will, get more leads, work less, and make more money in a way, and all this through using cutting edge technology. That's a really interesting one. I think it's going to be a really big opportunity. Very different for Israel. Israel's mostly cyber. This one's a consumer business. So I that's why I decided to single that one out.
That's very cool. I'll ask another question, Daniel. Sorry. Miriam actually asked a really interesting question about the high-tech industry in Israel. It goes like that. Are Israeli women missing out joining tech companies because they don't serve as a combat soldiers? And is the tech industry anyhow very masculine?
The short answer is no. I would say the vast majority of women don't serve in combat. There are more and more units that are either mixed units or female only units that are just important. I think October 7th there was a tent company that was entirely female that I think took out 30 or 40 terrorists. So it was an incredible act of heroism. So it's not tied to combat service. The vast majority, I would say probably 50% of the soldiers in the tech units in 8200 and those in subdivisions that are very technical are female, because it's not combat. They're incredibly smart, just as smart if not smarter than men. So their ability to kind of contribute in those units is super important. I think we're seeing more women from the Orthodox communities join those units versus in the past where they would just do national service, which is very important and positive that it's happening. And I think, unfortunately, the tech ecosystem is a little bit masculine. It's still, you know, more, you know, you see more male CEOs and female CEOs. But I think it's also like deeply rooted in just like, you know, the ruins of the past tech ecosystem where it was incredibly dominated by men. Tech companies were usually like, you know, defense companies where it was like some sort of, you know, general in the army, and, you know, statistically there were more men than women by a landslide. So I think it's slowly changing. The inclusion is becoming more significant, and the access to female CEOs and female entrepreneurs is becoming greater and greater. So I say it's nowhere near where it should be. But I also think the industry is definitely a meritocracy, and it's, you know, if you're smart and you know what you're doing, you'll get the job done. It's just a matter of, you know, sort of introducing the information, the data, and the tools to everyone, not just men.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. David, I think first I'm going to start with the compliments here in the questions and in comments. I think it's safe to say Australians like you very much. I'm just going to read Shoshana's comment. Could we clone your intelligence and personality to replace our current spokesman? So you have a future in Australia, just so you know. That's just one of the comments. And I'm going to go to the question. Paul Blanket has a question. I'm just going to read it. I've been reading that there has been enormous global interest in Israeli military tech. Has that area grown to the detriment of more traditional areas such as medical tech? You did speak a bit about the one that you just mentioned with the surgeries, but maybe give us a larger picture on that.
I think med tech and defense tech are very similar, but also incredibly different. They're very similar because they're domain specific, and the dynamics of their you know, perceived markets are very unique. You know, medical devices or medical technology in general, you have to go through many hoops in order to become viable from a business perspective, whether, you know, regulation, FDA, etc. Defense tech is also very similar on that part. You know, going through regulation, I think specifically in Israel, it's going to be a big challenge because there are a lot of limitations from the Ministry of Defense on what you can do with a defense tech company, especially since you're not really sure where the IP is coming from. You know, in software, you can say like, well, you know, they built something similar in the military and they're using it for civilian applications. Defense tech, the sort of the ambiguity doesn't really exist there, so it's challenging. I will say that if you look at the Israeli economy, you know, companies like Elbit and IAI and IWI have been, you know, basically, you know, raking in the cash since the beginning of the war, and it's great for the ecosystem and it's great for the country from a sort of, you know, tax revenue perspective. I think the entire world has gone a little bit crazy when it comes to military or, you know, militarization of their other countries, especially now with what's happening in the NATO countries. I think it's going to be great for Israel. I do believe that if you try to like inject a specific industry like that into the high tech industry, you're going to have a lot of challenges when it comes to liquidity events, basically meaning exits. Because, you know, if you're building a company, a cybersecurity company or a software company, the acquirers are pretty clear. It's, you know, the Googles of the world, it's the security companies of the world, and they know how to buy companies. Defense tech, not the same. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of hype, a lot of investors are going to invest in general funds that might do a defense deal here and there, and then wait 20 years before they have any exit or any capital return. So I think from an investment perspective, I'm more on like the waiting than like, you know, just going gung ho, going blazing. And then from a medical device perspective, I think it's always been a complex industry. But, you know, the players there are a lot more established. You know, medical device companies or pharmaceutical companies know how to acquire companies. They sort of, you know, created a playbook on how to build a startup in the space. I think defense tech is still very early, so there are going to be a lot of mistakes that will happen.
Everyone, we didn't touch on this. Just one maybe last question. Everyone loves to throw that word around, AI. We didn't speak about that. Maybe a simple question. Where does Israel stand globally on the AI system? Where are we? Are we doing good? Are we doing bad?
You wrote this question with ChatGPT, Daniel. Well done.
Thank you.
Good on you.
so I would say that's actually an area where we're a little bit lagging behind. If you look at AI, it's a buzzword. A lot of people saying AI about, you know, many different things. I think if you look at the underlying technology behind it, you know, the revolution that's happened, you know, spearheaded by OpenAI and Anthropic as like the biggest companies in the world that are doing amazing things. Those are heavily research-oriented companies. There's a lot of, smart people. There are a lot of PhDs from, the best universities in the world, typically, MIT, Stanford, etc., that are really pushing that forward. I think what happens in Israel from a research perspective, more often than not, is that once you reach your postdoc, you start looking outward. The universities in Israel are good only to a certain extent, and then they'll move to Stanford, they'll move to MIT, and there is a brain drain on the research perspective. So if you're looking at AI in general, from a really, basic, core level, we're losing that game. I don't think we're even playing. There's one company in Israel called AI21 that was founded by Amnon Shashua, who's the founder of Mobileye. They're doing some interesting things, but they're still far, far behind the competitors. On the flip side, if you look at companies or what they're doing with, applicative AI, taking the underlying technology and applying it to general purpose software or specific, vertical focused software, they're doing incredibly well. They're doing things that are phenomenal, because again, that connects to what I was mentioning about, why Israel's such a great tech ecosystem. Israelis know how to take the best tech and apply it to the toughest problems. So, being able to kind of leverage that. So we're winning the game as far as like the tier 2 AI is considered, like what we do with AI. But when it comes to research, we're far behind. There's a lot of talk about the government doing things around it and, having, an office of AI, etc. I'm a big believer that the Israeli tech ecosystem exists despite the government and not because of the government. So the government should stay away from it. It's more of just finding ways to incentivize researchers to stay in Israel or to come back to Israel. And I think that'll be from the private market and not from the government.
Brilliant. David, we are about to finish, so I want to thank you. I think, like, on behalf of all of us, to thank you and to say it was super, super interesting, because what you travel all over, what we see sometimes on the media, right, and on Facebook and on social media and Instagram and whatever, it's mainly about, the negative side of Israel, and it's kind of like cover everything in many ways. We really, really should not forget that there's like amazing things that's going on in like lots of fields, but the main engine of the high-tech companies and the startup companies is like booming in this crazy time, which is unbelievable. And it's
Absolutely.
also thank you, thank for people like you that keep going and doing what you do and impact Israel society in that sense also, which is incredible.
Nachon, I agree, Oded. I just want to add something. This is an Israel update, and we not often, but I think every single time speak about the Trumps of this world and Bibis
Right.
and Iran and Syria and Lebanon and Gaza and all the things that are happening in Israel. And too rarely do we get to hear about from people like you. And this is not some side of Israel. This is
Israel.
I'm not going to say also real Israel, but this is the beautiful Israel and
story.
the creative Israel and the chutzpah Israel and the creativity Israel and the survival Israel and all in one. So it was a real pleasure and honor, and thank you for getting up so early, and thank you for sharing all this with us. And we would love to stay in touch, obviously. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that.
All right, Boker Tov, and good day to everyone all around Australia. Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.